everyone. My name is Marisol Jimenez, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this webinar being offered through the Coping with Corona Collective. This series is an emerging response from our community as we all try to understand what this global pandemic means for us, for our loved ones, and our movement efforts in ways that are still revealing themselves. As I know that I've tried to adapt and evolve with this ever emerging reality, it often outpaces me. And one of the most visceral spaces that I have found myself in is in deep contemplation of death. My own mortality, that of the people I love, the loss of my pre-virus life, the millions who will need care in their passing and ceremony and honoring, the death of empire and illusions. And this particular darkness, I think, is probably some of our deepest shadow work. And so quickly, when I'm in that space, it activates my nervous system and my body until I'm left trembling and breathless. But each time, what has pulled me back out is reconnecting. And it's reconnecting with the knowing that these feelings, these experiences, the inevitability of death and living is ancient, it's sacred, collective, and necessary. And then I start all over again, trying to teach my body that lesson, my mind, my heart, my spirit, and trying to take a stance of surrender, while at the same time still deeply living and recognizing that deep living continues to be available to us even within that surrender. And so I am incredibly honored to introduce to you truly amazing women. Vivette-Jeffries-Logan and Omisade Burney-Scott. Omisade Burney-Scott is the founder of the incredible collective space known as the Black Women's Guide to Menopause. She has been instrumental in reproductive justice work and changed policies which allowed the state to force.
I'm immunocompromised, so I'm not gonna have you go into my bedroom. Just okay. It's the light over that. I can change it, but if you can change that one.
Thank you. Omisade was instrumental in reproductive justice work that changed policies which at that time allowed the state to force people to give birth in shackles while incarcerated, and Omi put a stop to that. She rides deep with the family known as Spirit House in Durham, North Carolina, and has also been such a powerful force in my own life. Vivette-Jeffries-Logan is an enrolled member of the Okanichi Band of the Saponi Nation and a powerful truth teller and healer through her work as the founder of Biwa Consulting. She was the founding director of the OBSN Tribal Health Circle, has worked with hundreds of movement leaders across the country in dismantling white supremacy, and is a leadership voice and amplifier in her community. I'm so incredibly grateful to have them with us today to share some wisdom from having held space for people in their own death and dying, in their roles as death doulas, from having lived lives where they have constantly been confronting state-sanctioned violence and death in their activism, and in their role as healers who have so much medicine to share. So I'm incredibly grateful and honored to welcome Omi and Vivette.
Thank you. Vivette, are you unmuted? I
am now.
All right. So Vivette is going to, well, first off, Madi, thank you so much for asking us to hold space with you. I see that we have quite a few people on the call, on the Zoom. Some faces I recognize, some faces I don't. Madi is also going to help us navigate with the chat. So as we are having this conversation, if things come up for you, drop them in the chat. We're also going to try to make space available for you at the end to ask questions. So we want to leave time for that. So I just want to make sure you know that. And also, if everyone can mute yourself in the meantime. Vivette is we're going to do a two-part kind of grounding to invite everybody to be in this space with us. And Vivette's going to kick us off, and then I'm going to chime in, and then we're going to start this conversation with y'all, okay?
Use ibi imatiluk nawa kana habnin tabunitika hinigu yesa nedidewahe munti hinigu yejileti. That is my introduction. That's my cultural introduction. In English, I said good afternoon. My name is Morning Star. I am she who carries the fire. My borrowed name is Vivette-Jeffries-Logan. And I would invite you all to take a breath deep into your lungs, and now exhale. And let's do one more. Inhale, and then hold it, and now exhale. One of my responsibilities and honors is when visitors and newcomers and other relatives come to our land is to welcome them to our land. And I realize that we're all in different places. And what I'll ask you to do is just think for a moment, let your body settle in, and ask if you know the original people. Whose land are you on? Where are you right now? That's not something that's talked about. And we're talking about death and dying. And in order for this United States to be this United States, the original people of the land, wherever you are, on Turtle Island, there was attempted genocide. And I say attempted because I'm still here. And if you don't know, I invite you to find out who was there. Because the earth that you stand on is the dust of the bones of their ancestors, right? I am fortunate enough to live and walk and be on my ancestral homeland. And it is what allows me to continue to do the work that I do. Because when I feel depleted, I can take my shoes and socks off and put my feet on the dust of the bones of my ancestors.
Okay. Can folks hear me? You can hear me, do a thumbs up. All right. Thank you, Vivette. Thank you, Morning Star. So most of the people who know me as Omisade Burney-Scott, but I was born Wilhelmina in New Bern, North Carolina, 7th generation New Bernian. And my people and my ancestors, our roots stop at Eastern North Carolina, right? I have not done the DNA test yet to try to trace where my indigeneity originates from, right? So the indigeneity of the African, right, and who were stolen and enslaved and brought here to this place. I don't know that. I don't know that place. I know what feels compelling, but I don't know that place. So my offering to this grounding before we get into this conversation is a spiritual practice that I have been gifted with by spirit. I was raised in a traditional missionary Baptist church in Eastern North Carolina. And then when I was 30, my ancestors and my spirit guides right-sized me to practice Ifa Yoruba. And I am an initiated priest in the tradition. I'm initiated to the Orisha Oshun, who is a riverine deity. Oshun represents sweet water. Oshun represents the river. So therefore, Oshun represents abundance and creativity and culture and home. Many people who know Oshun from her New World manifestation call her she, but that has been put on the river. And I'm also initiated to what is called the Egungun Society, and Egungun means ancestor in Yoruba. Ifa Yoruba originates in Southeast Nigeria. So I have my plant here. We're going to do a quick libation. Because no matter what your practice is, whether you have a spiritual practice, a contemplative practice, a meditative practice, whether you consider yourself religious, spiritual, atheist, agnostic, there is one undeniable fact, right? And that's that we all have ancestors. So in the same way that Vivette just offered to you all this conversation that we're having today, we get to acknowledge our ancestors because we are actual physical manifestations of our ancestors, right? The mortality that we often seek is present in us because we carry with us in our DNA our ancestors. We carry it in our smile, in our eye color, our hair, the way we move. It's continuous. And so what I'm going to do, even though everybody's on mute, is I'm going to give folk an opportunity to say the name of an ancestor. And so even though I want you to stay on mute and I won't be able to hear you, we can feel each other. We can feel each other, all right? And so I'm going to say a word. I'm going to say Mojuba. Mojuba means I honor you. So when I say Mojuba, I want you to be able to call out the name of an ancestor. Here's a caveat. Please don't call out the name of a person whose transition is a year or less because they're still on a journey and they're still making their way. And so, you know, like if you're trying to do something or trying to get somewhere, if you're running errands and you're working on a project and someone keeps calling your name, you get distracted, right? You look back, you try to figure out who's talking, somebody calling my name? And so what we don't want to do is distract them from our journey. So we're going to ask you, absolutely. Yes, that's right. We're moving forward and we're allowing them to move forward. And we know that there's been some recent loss in our community, several recent losses. And so we don't want to call that person's name because we want to allow them to keep making their journey to the realm of the ancestors. So I've got my son's Rainbow Dash cup because that's what I can find. You know, we've been sheltering in home for almost 2 weeks now. That's what I got. So we're going to do libation with Rainbow Dash from My Little Pony and my plant. And we're going to do 3 familiar mojubas, and then we're going to do 3 community movement or culture mojubas. And what I mean by that, I might do a mojuba for, I don't know, Ntozake Shange, who has such an intense experience with me. If y'all are not muted, can you mute yourself? Is everybody muted? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So that would be a cultural ancestor. So 3 ancestors from your bloodline, 3 ancestors who you would consider cultural, community, or movement. So I'm going to say Mojuba, and then you're going to say the name. You ready? So everybody just take a moment to get grounded back in where you're sitting. And relax. You're in this space with us. We get to talk to each other. It's all good. So we're going to call the name of our family member. Mojuba, call the name. Mary Ella Kinsey McConnell Burney. Mojuba, William George McConnell. Mojuba, Charlie Burney Sr. Take a breath. Now we will call 3 cultural or movement names. Okay. Mojuba, Cynthia Brown. Mojuba, Pearl Shelby Sharp. Mojuba, Tony K. Bambara. Ashe. And so before we move into this conversation that Vivette and I have been talking about so much, I want to read a little poem to you. Can I read a poem to you guys? Can I read a poem? All right, cool. This poem is called Sleeping in Forest. It's by Mary Oliver. It's one of my favorite poems and one of my favorite poets. So if you want to close your eyes, you can. I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly, arranging her dark skirts, her pockets full of lichens and seeds. I slept as never before, a stone on a riverbed. Nothing between me and the white fire of the stars but my thoughts, and they floated like moths among the branches of the perfect trees. All night I heard small kingdoms breathing around me, the insects and the birds who do their work in darkness. All night I rose and fell as if in water, grappling with a luminous doom. By morning, I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better. So, all right, Miss Vivette-Jeffries. So when Marty reached out to us, Vivette and I checked in. I've known Vivette now 15 years at least, and I consider her my sister of the heart, and we talk often, and we hold space for each other often. And we did a check-in last week, and she asked me how I was doing, and I said, I'm not good. You know, and when you are known in your community as someone who does healing work or healing justice work, or if people know that you hold a spiritual role in your community, then you sometimes get elevated to this weird place that detaches you from your humanness. You know, it's like, oh, well, I know that I can call on Omisade for X, Y, and Z, or I can call on Vivette for X, Y, and Z, but it's kind of devoid sometimes of that human interaction where it's like, oh, how's your heart? How are you feeling? And so when we were talking about having this conversation about dying, death and dying, as it relates to what we're experiencing right now with the coronavirus and COVID-19 and all the things that we're seeing all over the world, I was honest. I was like, I'm not feeling great. I'm not feeling great. And I have a lot of tools available to me, a lot of tools that can help me navigate the world, a lot of tools that have been a part of my practice that connect me to the Most High or connect me to my ancestors. And I still wasn't feeling great. I was feeling in a funk. Y'all might hear this congestion that I have going on. I have a sinus infection, which, of course, I had decided to self-diagnose myself with the coronavirus, which is not helpful. It's not useful. It's just not useful, but I did it, you know. I did go to the doctor, and you know, it was a whole process of going to the doctor where I had to stay in my car, and then I had to call a number, and then after I called the number, then they let me come inside, and I had to put on a mask, and my primary care physician, who's been my primary care physician for 20 years, looked like an extra in an apocalyptic movie. And he was like, have you come in contact with someone who has COVID-19? I'm like, not that I know of. It's possible. I don't know. And 10 minutes I was out, they were like, you have a sinus infection, go home. I was like, okay. So I went home. And I had dreams. How many, by show of hands, how many folk have been having really intense dreams? Yeah, right? And for me, as a dreamer, as a person who dreams a lot and who's a lucid dreamer, I knew that my dreams were not dreams, they were visitations. And so when I was talking to Vivette, I said, I am tired because I'm being visited, you know, that my folk have messages for me. And right now, well, they've calmed down. But I felt like the messages were messages of assurance, messages of reminding, messages of affirmation, but they were all coming really quickly. It was like, so I couldn't sleep. I could not get to sleep. And if I got to sleep, I would wake up 3 o'clock in the morning and I was up. So when we talked, I told her, I said, I'm not feeling great. And I know that what we are experiencing is a dying process. There are things that are dying, people who are dying, as a result of the virus, but there were also people who were dying because this was a part of their destiny. They were dying in this moment. That had nothing to do with the virus, you know? And so when you see those numbers on the ticker, right? The numbers that say how many people have been confirmed infected, and then the numbers, those are people. They have names, right? They have families, they have partners, they have children, they have grandchildren, they have community. And the separation again from the humanness in this moment around the weight of what we are managing and negotiating was sitting heavy on my heart. It was sitting real heavy, real heavy. I have 2 boys. I have a 28-year-old who is sheltering in home in Brooklyn, New York, and he is not feeling it. And all I want to do is drive to New York and go get him. And I have an 11-year-old who's with me between my house and his dad's house. He's just a bundle of light. And he's also worried about his brother and his friends and the world for that fact. So that's where I was beginning, and I wanted to acknowledge that for a lot of us who are on this call, many of us are called to pick up the freedom plow for justice, right? We got it. We keep our shoulder on it hard. That's what we do. We drive in that freedom plow. There are many of us who are healers, many of us who are artists. You know, we don't operate with one identity, so there are many of us who walk with all of those identities. And you know what is our greatest identity that we need to remember in this moment is our human. For all of the calls that you are on, even this one, the Zooms, the conference calls, I've been Zoomed to damn death. I've been Zoomed to damn death. I don't know about anybody else, but Lord knows. Wow. I don't want us to be separated from our humanness. All of the identities that you walk with, the precious one that I want us to hold on to in this moment with each other on this phone is your humanness, however you're feeling it. So too much Zoom is right. So I'm gonna kick it to Vivette to share how they were feeling, because we had a real earnest conversation. I was like, I ain't feeling good. And she was like, well, Omi, that's not how I'm feeling. I was like, oh shit, okay then.
So I talked to Omi because I was feeling like something was wrong with me, right? Because I wasn't feeling giddy and happy and, ungrounded and oblivious, right? I know what's going on. But there was no anxiety and I wasn't afraid, right? So, and in planning for this call, Mari and Omi we were emailing, right? And I had to sit with their emails because I was like, is something wrong with me, right? Because I'm okay, right? And in conversations with my elders and my community, I was reminded, I was reminded to remember. First thing is that I'm here because my ancestors survived our pandemic, the smallpox, right? How the colonizers attempted to kill us with smallpox, to eradicate us. I'm here. And in my language, blood memory is konspewai, right? And so I carry what happened to us, but I also carry how we survived and our strength in our blood memory, right? And then I'm not afraid of death. I am respectful of it, but I'm not afraid of it because of my relationship, right? Through the process, it was asking, what is my relationship with death, right? My mother passed in 2018, right? Omi and I, with 4 other women, held space for Cynthia as she transitioned, right? I've held space, a traveling ceremony for a 6-month-old baby who passed unexpectedly on our I did it on our tribal ground, and that was my first time, and I was like, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And one of my elders was like, yes, you can, calm down, right? And my best friend was murdered in 2017, right? So I have a relationship with death. And then I had to admit my own, right? When I was 6 months pregnant with my oldest son, who is now 22, his father put a 22 firearm, a gun to my head, and it misfired. And I said to Creator, if you let me live, I won't go back. And I didn't. And that's when I was reminded that I'm here for a reason. Because as I put in the email to Mari and to Omi, that death was in the room so close that I could feel its breath, and the fact that I'm here, it is my responsibility and honor to walk in my medicine, what's been given to me. And so I don't carry that fear, right? I'm not ignorant. I respect it, but I'm also not afraid, because in our culture, death is just a transition. It's another place, right? When our people die, they travel for a year up to sit at the altar with the ancestors, right? So they're not alone. And even with that knowing, right? This morning when Omi, this is how Creator works. Omi reached out and called me this morning with, I hadn't reached out or anything. Yes, we have this call, but she checked in with me, right? And I've been checking in with some people on this call. They've been checking in and holding space for me. But I told her I felt heavy, and was able to articulate why I felt so heavy is the collective grief that is here on this planet, right? The collective grief, as well as fear of the unknown, the anxiety, right? It's palpable. And by naming it and basically saying, I see you, right? I was able to let it pass through me and not congregate in my body, right? So as you know, grief, also we talked about this, there's a collective death because capitalism is on life support right now, right? This trauma of busyness, and I'm spinning my hand, right? It's like that's dying. What all of us have known, what we've been socialized in, is dying. And some people are afraid of the unknown, right? And that's okay, but we can't stay paralyzed in the grief of, I don't know what's next, right? I'm sure that, as I said on an earlier call, that we will get to the other side, right? but it's up to us on how we be on the other side. And then the last thing is that the busyness is one of the manifestations of colonization, of capitalism, that keeps us from doing what's in our own best interest, even when we know it, right? And being on calls with organizations who are like, okay, let's do a Zoom call to have this meeting, to have this meeting, to have this meeting, without even giving staff enough space and bandwidth to just land and be. Because I remember saying on the Zoom call with my partners, I was like, this is not a snow day, y'all. This may be going on indefinitely, right? We need to give people a space to breathe. But when we've got leaders who are terrified and whose identity is based on what they produce, right? They're driving this bus. And it's just inhuman to think that busyness is going to save us. And so that's also a death, right? Busyness is not going to save us, just like money in the bank won't save us, right? We are at a place where we're at the tipping point. We're past the tipping point. No, we're past the tipping point. And it's like, are we going to continue to be in the same way? Are we going to pause and breathe and figure out how to move differently once we come on the other side of this?
That's right. That's right. Thank you. How many people have been on 5 or more Zoom calls in the last week and a half? Raise your hand. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Keep your hand raised. 5 or more Zoom calls. Look, y'all now. So, yes, to lots of the boo. So, I have experienced Zoom calls on a spectrum, which is also how I think I'm experiencing the shedding in this time on a spectrum, right? So the Zoom calls that have been with family, because our family is spread out, and that felt like a good tool so we could see each other's faces and feel each other through this medium. And I've also been on Zoom calls when there've been 100 or more people, and that felt like trying to jump into a double Dutch rope that was going really, really fast. I couldn't do it. I was just like, you know what? I can't do it. I can't do it. I feel like I'm gonna get slapped in the face. So I'm just going to back up. But I also realized that the hyper productivity that Vivette is talking about, which is a function of us living in this capitalist society, which is also a function of our upbringing and our conditioning. None of us actually are devoid of our conditioning. We may be in a practice of unlearning our conditioning and our upbringing, but none of us are like divorced from it. None of us have escaped it, right? None of us are above it. And so in moments like this, when we have no control over, there's an expectancy, right? We're in a window. We don't know how long the window's going to last. We don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know if it's going to touch us personally. So there's so much unknown that we may feel like it's time to fill that void up with busyness. And that's a similar process that happens when a person finds out that they may be terminally ill, or you may find out that a person that you love is unwell and will be making their transition at some point that's closer than you anticipated before, right? We all know that each of us are going to make that transition. And sometimes we're gifted with a heads up. Sometimes we get a nod and say, listen, this is going to happen. And you're being gifted an opportunity to prepare for that transition. And in that moment of expectancy, in that moment where you don't know when, right? You might get that heads up and it could happen 24 hours later. You could get the heads up, it happens a year later, but you're given a heads up. And in that heads up, we start kind of traveling an emotional cycle. And there might be some folk on the phone who are familiar with the cycles of grief, right? So it's like you first get information and you may be in denial and you isolate yourself because it's just like a 1-2 punch. It's a gut punch. What does this mean? And I feel like the same thing is happening with COVID. So COVID was happening over there, and then COVID was happening over there, and now COVID is happening here. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Oh, well, I can keep moving. I can keep moving. No, I can't keep moving. Oh, now I got to do this. And so every day we get new information that makes the space that we are operating in even tighter with less information around what is it going to mean for me personally. So the denial and isolation is one of the first things that kind of manifests when people are experiencing death and dying, and they're experiencing this grief as well around what's happening or what has happened, right? And then the next thing is anger. And there are some folk who are pissed. You can see this by the folk who are defiant. There's a defiance that we are bearing witness to. People on spring break, people who are like, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna go to a party anyway, or pastors who are saying, well, we're gonna pull our churches together, we're gonna bring it, and we're defying this moment, and that's a part of the grief process. It's like, I do not. It's also a part of Aquarius characteristics. So if anybody don't know it's an Aquarius do this as well. So I just want to be clear. This is also an Aquarius thing. But you're angry. You're just like, the fuck is this? What is going on? So, and you may toggle back and forth between those two. And then the next thing you know, you start bargaining. Okay. Well, if I do this, which is, you see people who have they got the mask on, they got the gloves on, they have taken all of the water and all of the toilet paper, right? They're like, if I got all of the things, I will be safe. Correct, right? All the things. I have 20,000 rolls of toilet paper. I'm wrapping myself up in a hefty bag, navigating the world. I'm spraying Lysol. I'm using a hand sanitizer. I'm washing my hands 25 times a day. And if you're going to get the coronavirus, you're going to get the coronavirus. I don't want to poo-poo or minimize good science or good sense. I think this is a moment for good science and good sense. Could we bring those two things together where you use that good science, information that you're receiving, and some good sense in that moment, right? But some of the bargaining, the hyper bargaining in the moment is like, oh, what are we gonna do? And then you may enter into some depression, right? Where you don't want to get out of the bed. You don't want to take a shower. You don't want to brush your teeth. You don't want to talk to anybody. Don't want to be on social media. You don't want to be on another damn Zoom call or a conference call. You just want to sleep. Be quiet. Be by yourself. And that's a part of the process as well, right? And then there's something called acceptance. And acceptance, I think sometimes when we hear the word acceptance, we feel like, oh, acceptance will feel light, or acceptance will feel like fun. No, acceptance will feel real. Acceptance will feel like resolve, resolution. Acceptance will feel like clarity, like you're seeing things fully, right? And these are things that are in a loop. I don't know if anybody has read Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategies, but there's a piece in here that talks about things in the world not being linear and being iterative. It's called nonlinear and iterative. And the cycles of grief are nonlinear and iterative. You may not experience them in any particular order. You may not experience all of them, and they can be iterative. They can keep coming. They roll. And so as folk who, and I have to say something here about the death doula moniker that Vivette and I have accepted, because it wasn't like we announced it. We accepted it. We accepted it. And in the same manner that Vivette experienced death and was like, death is in this room, death is here. I had made a pact with myself as a child that when my mother was going to be making a transition, and I don't know why it came up for me as a kid, but it did for some reason. I just felt like I had this moment of thinking, I love my mama so much. She's so amazing. She's one of the best people in the world that I know. And if she ever were to transition, I would just be undone by it. This would just be awful. I don't ever want to be without her. And so I made a pact with myself as a little girl that I would go insane, because I felt like that was the easy thing. It's like easy proposition. When you get the information that your mother's going to make her transition, go insane. You won't be in your right mind, so you won't be able to experience it. You won't be sad. That sounds like a great idea, right? And that's not what happened. It's not what happened. And so when I was 31 and my mother made her transition, and she was the first person I bore witness to and supported in their process of leaving that body to return to an ancestral space, I didn't go insane. I broke the pact. I broke the deal. I gave it up, and I accepted my role. I accepted my role as somebody who was going to be in space with her and encourage her to let her body do. I'm going to mute this person. Encourage her to let her body do what it was made to do, which is to die. Right? That was my role. And I leaned into the role, and I asked for support. I asked for support from my friends who were there with me physically. I also asked for support from my ancestors. Help me do this. I don't know how to do this. And so once I've done it, then apparently this is something I do, which is how we ended up doing it again and again and again. This is how Vivette and I ended up doing it together with our friend Cynthia 3 years ago. This is how we ended up doing it with my stepdad, how I ended up doing it with my auntie and a good girlfriend. It visits you in a way. And I know that there are some folk who are on this Zoom call who are like, is this something that I'm called to do? And I don't know. You will know, actually. You will know. There are a lot of people out here in the world now who are offering training and certifications and support around death and dying, and giving people a lot of information to help them navigate that. And I think that's really important. And then there are also folk who find themselves in their group of friends, in their family, in their community as that person. So I think that Vivette and I's initiation into the space of being a death doula similarly was like the moment presented itself and we had no choice. The second moment presented itself, we had a choice and we chose to do it. The first moment, didn't have a choice. Did not have a choice. You're like, am I going to do this? I am going to do this. But the second time, you have a choice. And should you choose to continue to respond affirmatively to the request for your support and your guidance, then you do your study to prepare yourself, and you got to figure out what you need to take care of yourself. So here we are, round circle, in this moment where, anybody remember that song, It's the End of the World as We Know It? It's the end of the world as we know it. It is absolutely the end of the world as we know it. And what we are seeing, and I don't feel fine. I do not feel fine, right? I don't. But what we were seeing in ourselves, in our families, is a cycle, right? The denial and the isolation, the anger and the bargaining, the depression and the acceptance is rolling. And one of the things that Vivette and I talked about, and I want her to say a little bit more about that, is how you get through this is you take good care of yourself. The amount of care that is necessary for you when you are in this moment that is wide and broad, and the time frame for it is shifting, we don't know, is you have to take care of yourself. So the last thing I'll say before Vivette kicks in is, like, we ask each other, and I think I've said this to, I think I saw Nikki on the line recently. We were talking about your death doula bag. If you find yourself in a place where the identity of a death doula is coming more and more present to you, this is a place that you find yourself returning to and saying yes to, you need a bag. And I don't mean just of any old bag. What is your toolkit to take care of yourself, right? What do you do that allows you to return to yourself? What do you do that allows you to cleanse yourself off of energy? Because energy attaches, it's heavy. What do you do to eat, to stay hydrated, to take naps, to cry outside of the space that you're holding for that person or that family so you can return refreshed? What's in your bag? And I think we also need to figure out what's in our bags, in our homes, in these spaces, as we're navigating this very open-ended time period. What do you have to take care of yourself? I'm gonna mute myself.
Yes, because taking care of yourself, if you're going to hold space for someone who is transitioning, right? You can't show up as a hot, raggedy mess and hold space for them, right? That's disrespectful. It's also unhelpful, right? So all of those things that Omi talked about. And when I was talking about holding space for people, in the conversation that I was having, how I was being guided through, like, to come to my own relationship with death, there was another person that I got a call at 5:30 in the morning my time, and they're on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, with being in the hospital and saying, don't freak out, but I've been diagnosed with leukemia at 28, 29 years old. My nephew, right? And I held space for them through this process, a 4-year process, and had a conversation with them early one morning. I remember it vividly. I'm standing at my kitchen sink on the phone looking out my kitchen window, and their partner and their mother was saying, well, you could try this and you could try this. This is what you should do. This is what you should do. And they were exasperated. And I said, it's up to you. This is your journey. This is your decision. You don't live your life for someone else. And I said, although I will miss you, your physical body, I will miss you being here, that it is your responsibility. It's your choice. And they still tell me to this day how much that meant for me to give them permission to make that transition, to make that choice. It's been a 4-year journey. And as of, I think, February, they are in full remission. But to hold that space for someone, knowing that death is in the room, death was all up in the room, right? But to give someone the permission to make that decision, not for me, not for you, right? That was another part of my journey. And then also knowing that when someone asks you to hold space for them when they're transitioning, this ain't about you. This is not about you, right? And I'll share the story of how Cynthia put the call out. And I had come home from a 2-day training and I was washing clothes and had just finished putting the last pair of socks together. And Omi called and she was like, okay, we're at Cynthia's and we're creating her ancestor altar. Can you come? I was like, give me an hour. I was there in 30 minutes. And I knew that I was going to be there for the duration, right? I said yes, because Cynthia was also a trainer with me in Dismantling Racism Works. But Cynthia was more than that, because my mother had Alzheimer's and was there in that liminal state for 7 years. Cynthia fed me. Cynthia allowed me to come and lay on her couch. Cynthia was petty with me. Cynthia laughed with me. But we were at a retreat down at the beach on Topsail Island. And I was sitting in the corner and Cynthia, there was 7 of us, and she's like, what's the matter? And that's when I was beginning the process that my mother was gone and her body was still here, but her spirit was gone, right? And she and my other co-workers, my other partners in DR Works, stood up on the steps while I went down to the beach and sprinkled tobacco in the water. And I told my mother then, I said, Mommy, if you're ready to go, you can go. Because holding her here was selfish. And then when I came back up the steps, Cynthia Brown was standing there and she said, I know how it is to be a motherless child. And so how could I not show up for Cynthia when she put the call out, right? And I want you all to know that, yes, death was in the room with us, but Cynthia Brown said she did not want us crying. She wanted a party. And so we had music, we were laughing, we were talking. We were also talking to Cynthia, right? Because that is what she wanted. So it's to honor people's wishes. And none of us in that room, I could not have done that if I was not grounded and I was not ready, right? Because if I'm rolling up in there like the Tasmanian devil, I would have wrecked shop, right? I'm sure Omi would have been like, I'm gonna need you to go and lay down somewhere because you are disturbing what's up in here, right? Yes, I had eaten, right? Like Omi talked about. I was hydrated because we were in it for the long haul, right? And so taking care of self is, right, paramount. Being grounded is paramount. And even doing this work, each time is different, right? So there are no, like, I don't pull out like, okay, let me look at page 72 of my manual, right? A lot of this is instinctual. You just know, you flow, which is also why working with someone that you trust is paramount, because you'll be able to flow without words. We flow without words, right? But again, one of the most profound ways that you can honor someone is to ground yourself, right? And so in this moment, how are you grounding yourself? How are you taking care of yourself? How are you disconnecting from the 5 Zoom calls a day, right? I get cranky. I'm tired of trying to hold space for people who are worrying about, y'all, they're worrying about bylaws. They're worrying about grant reports. They're worrying about, oh my God, we have to do this. We have to do. Somebody talked about a strategic plan, and you see my face. I'm like, really? This is what you're talking about right now. Can I please get off this call and go back to my jigsaw puzzle? Because that is one of the things that I'm doing, right? How can we be present with what is? Because strategic plans will not save us. Bylaws will not save us, right? None of the grant reports will not save us because we're also working with funders too, and they spending out of control. So it's like the way that we have been doing business is being interrupted. But again, it's like, I'm going to focus on what I know that's a safe place, right? It's about, wait a minute, taking a breath, breathing, sit still. Because in my culture, what I've been taught is we already have what we need, but it's been lost under the rubble of colonization. And when we begin to let go of the trappings and the lies and the productivity, is because our worth is not about what we do, right? It has no connection. That's a lie, right? So when you begin to breathe, I'm not talking breathing from here, I'm talking about breathing from down deep, right? Then you will begin to remember, because my elders say you don't learn what you already know. We've got it in our bones about a different way of being. But we've got to slow down enough to allow ourselves to stop spinning and be able to hear. So the groundedness is what I'm talking about. The self-care. You can't hear when your stomach's grumbling. You can't hear when you're sleepy, right? You can't hear when you're stressed out about, why do I have to be on 5? Because I think I saw somebody in the chat room say that they were on 5 Zoom calls per day. Okay, I'm cranky. I'm done. By the third one, I'm like, right? But also, yes, we're doing physical isolation, right? Yes, we're doing physical isolation. That doesn't mean that we have to be socially isolated. Phone calls work, right? Zoom can work, but being in relationship also means, how do we sustain these relationships in the midst of what we're going through right now? Because being in community may have shifted, but the relationships should not shift.
I think I want to, I'm mindful of time, and I did want to, we were hoping that you all might have some questions or some thoughts you want to share, like how are you taking care of yourself and how are you processing this moment, or folk have something they want to share out. And Marisol said that she'd be willing to help moderate this part, so that way if Vivette and I want to chime in, but we really do want to check in with y'all around how y'all are feeling. No worries, Alba. And hang in there on that next Zoom call, honey. Tell them we said don't do too much. Take that with you. Tell them don't do too much. Don't do too much. And no worries. So we're gonna, check in. And Marty, I'm gonna go on mute so you can help with that.
So feel free to type your questions into the chat and then I can call your name. And I actually, I'll share while I'm waiting for others to volunteer in here. I think that, I was talking to you, Omi, and Vivette by email, but for me right now, it's just really been about returning to sacred practice and returning to my altar and lighting my candles, and then remembering that what I'm feeling is as lonely and individually scary as it can be at times, that I'm actually part of a huge web of people who are feeling these things. And then there's a soothing to that I'm not alone with it. And I think maybe because that's what's one of my fears, is that I'll be alone with it. I'll be alone with dying. I'll be alone with suffering. I'll be alone with the experience. And so, yeah, I think that just connection, even if it's channeled through ancestor and ancient and things beyond my memory that I'm connecting to. We have a question here from Lynn. Lynn, if you want to unmute and share your question.
Sure. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot, because my whole family is spread out like a lot of folks' families are. And so just wondering, what are ways that we can support our loved ones who may or who will transition this time, especially if we are separated from each other, either because we have to be separated, or we're not allowed to travel to them, or we don't have the resources to get 6 states over. So it's just something that I've been sitting with a lot and thinking about.
I'll kick in, Vivette, and then you want to chime in. So that's really hard. So the first thing I want to, it's really important to not gloss over that that's really hard, right? Because I think sometimes when that kind of question gets presented, we kick into solutions. You could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. There are actually a few things you can do, but the first thing is really important, is that that's hard. That's hard for them, and that's hard for you. It's hard for whatever the truth is of your relationship with this person, whether that's a relationship that has been beautiful and healthy and loving the entirety of your journey with this person, or it's hard if it's been toxic as fuck. And here you are now trying to figure out how to support this person who may be in transition and you can't be there with them physically. It is very important for you to know that it's truth. There's so much truth in the fact that it's hard. So that's, I think, the first thing that I would offer is knowing that it's hard. I think the second thing, and this mirrors a little bit of what Vivette said about how you show up, you do your best. You do your best. There is no perfection in that space. There's no perfection anywhere, but there is certainly no perfection in that space of trying to figure out how to show up for someone who you can't physically be in the same space with. So you do your best, right? You find ways to connect with that person. You find ways to keep communication going with that person. You find ways to send energy, whether you pray or you meditate or you journal or you sing or whatever. If you have ritual that you can tap into, you do ritual. You hold ritual for that person where you are. And you do your best. You do your very best. And that is as much as you actually can do, because it is not actually useful or healthy to beat yourself into a frenzy of what you can't do. So in as much as I appreciated being able to be present with my mother when she passed away, my brother died in his sleep. So I didn't get the benefit of being able to be present for his transition. So then what I ended up having to do was kick in after we got the news, right? To then step into that space by first holding ritual for him in my home, right? I held ritual for him in my home first. And I gave myself permission to let myself off the spot for not being with him, because I couldn't have been there. I didn't know it was going to happen. I couldn't have prepared for that. So then what did I do? I held space for him now that I had the information, right? So this may be a truthfulness for many of us on the phone who have folk who are aging, folk who have underlying health issues, folk who we don't even know what's going on with them, and they may die unexpectedly during this process where we are apart from each other. Do your best, Lynn. Just do your best. Vivette?
Yes, do your best. It's not about trying to be the end all and be all for everybody. And when Omi said that she did ritual for her brother, I was 8 years old when my nana, we live right next door to her. And she had a brain tumor, and this was back in the 70s. And they couldn't get all of so as my mama says, all of the fingers, they couldn't get it. And they gave her 6 months and she lived 12. And when I said she lived 12, we were at the beach, we were at the mountains. She was down at Crest in Durham, in the real Crest, right? When it was still Crest, buying bib overhauls for my granddaddy, right? Like that's, yes. I tell people that if there's nobody else on the face of the earth ever loved me, Elsa Jeffries, I know she loved me. She died when I was 8. She, for about 4 days, she was in that liminal space, right? And she called me into the room as an 8-year-old. And she was hallucinating. And she said, Vivette, I want you to go down to the fishing pier, crawl through the little hole, pull up the string with the fish on it, and then clean it and get Liza to fry it. I want a fish sandwich. I'm 8. I didn't have the capability to get her a fish sandwich. And I held that stone in my spirit until I was 32 years old. And I went up to her grave and I sat down and I sobbed just like she died that day or that year. And I said, I'm sorry that I couldn't get you a fish sandwich. And she was like, you were a baby. It's okay. So I'm sharing that with, even if you can't do it immediately, right? I'm 32. I was 8 and I did it when I was 32, right? Because also my mother, in her decision, she said that my brother and I didn't need to go to her funeral, right? And so I didn't get to grieve. So I grieved at my grandmother's grave when I was 32. And that, I don't carry that with me anymore. I carry her with me, right? She's always with me. But the grief of not being able to do the last thing that my grandmother asked me to do, right? So you'll know. And then another thing is, if they're able to talk, right? Ask them questions about, so what was your favorite candy when you were little, right? And that is a way that they can begin to tell you stories, right? And I promise you it'll wrap around into everything. One story will lead to another, right? Very simple question like, what was your favorite candy? Or what was your favorite cookie, right? Just ask those kind of questions. And because when I asked my grandfather that, he was like, why do you want to know all this? I was like, just keep talking, right? And I wrote it down. So, and he died when I was like an adult. Like he's been dead 12 years now. So, but it's ways to just be with them, right? To just be with them. And you will carry those memories, right, with you. But being present for them. But like I said earlier, we've talked about earlier, to be present with them, you got to be present with yourself first.
So we have a thread of questions that are all kind of getting at the same piece. And it really is about this fear of what we have been witnessing on the news, of people not being able to attend funerals or wakes, of, people being, taken out en masse because of the danger and the numbers. So there's this loss of the grieving rituals that we are used to doing in community together. And so there's the question is, one, how do we replace that if it's not available? How do we create those kinds of grieving rituals for those that we may lose? And then I would also add, how do we communicate? How do we begin to even think about and then share about what we would want if it were us and we were passing that, what kind of grieving rituals we want done in our own names? So can you speak to that piece, please?
Yeah, I'll speak to the last piece and then make my way back to the community piece. So in the same way that Vivette was suggesting that you give people an opportunity to share their stories with you, like asking them their favorite cookie, their favorite candy, which I think Marisol might have put in the chat, that is also the beginnings of building their ancestor altar. And that is something that can be put in that space that you return to to honor their energy after they've made their transition that represents them. But I had a health scare this summer, and I realized that while I do have a will, my children didn't know where it was. I was hospitalized for 8 days. I have a will, I have a power of attorney, all of these things laid out, and I hadn't told anybody where it was in the house. So this is the thing about having tools, right? If you have tools, the tools need to be in a space where you can point to the tool, use the tool, and also let other people know where the tools are. And so I had a conversation with my oldest son to let him know that, no worries, to let him know where that was. And I also had a conversation with him, and they're going to continue to have conversations with him about what I want in terms of my funeral, what I want culturally, what I want community-wise. I have borne witness to at least 3 people who were very clear about what they wanted as far as funerals were concerned. Cynthia was very clear. 3 days before she transitioned, she sent me a text, which is when I texted Vivette, and Mama Nia might still be on the phone as well. She was like, I need you to come over to help me plan my memorial. That was the text. I need you to come over to help me plan my memorial. I was like, okay. She's like, and I need you to be in contact with Nia, and I need you to be in contact with Vivette. And I was like, oh, okay. So I had to get myself together because I'm going to help her put together her memorial. The actual program, who she wanted to sing, who she wanted to speak, who she did not want to cook. She had very specific instructions. She said she didn't want the white women in our group to cook. She said they can be hostesses, but I don't want them to prepare any food because I have a Black family and I'm a Black person. I need all the food to be prepared by Black hands. So we honored that request. We were like, no problem. And the women in our women's group were like, all right, we'll take that. I will host. I will clean up. I will not cook. My mother did that. Very, very clear. What she wanted, what she did not want, even to the specifics of the dress she wanted, which took a lot of weight off my shoulders. But we're not always gifted with that. And so when you experience a death that takes your breath away because it was so unexpected, like we lost our beloved Umar, who was a part of Spirit House, to a motorcycle accident in 2017. He was 30 years old. We didn't have any of these things. But what we could do in that moment of wrapping and this gets to this collective question. I saw a couple people asking the collective question, and I know Charles, I think you asked some of the collective question. What we could do as a collective is to reach out to his mother, who was going to bury her child, and let her know that we would do whatever she needed us to do. Whatever she needed us to do. And we did that. So because he was born and raised Muslim, there was a quick turnaround between his transition and the funeral service and his burial, right? So we participated in that. We followed her lead. We asked her what information she needed to get out to the community, And we followed that lead. We followed that lead. And then we hosted the repast at the vault. Now, a couple of months later, we had a community celebration. And we asked her what she wanted. And we did what she wanted. And we did that at Hay Tide. And so I think what I would say around this holding community grief is that there's the moment when that initial transition happens and how you hold each other in that moment, especially because especially because right now in the moment that we're in, we can't be together, figuring out ways to touch base with each other. So whether that is a call, whether that is a text, whether that is a joint ritual where someone takes the lead and says, everybody, if you have a candle in your home, 7 o'clock on Sunday, light that candle, and we are going to amplify a prayer for this person's transition. And we do it all together. I have done that with other priests in my tradition where they're like, okay, on Sunday at 7 o'clock, be in front of your shrine, and we're going to say this prayer. We're going to do the Ifa prayer, or we're going to do the Oshun prayer, or we're going to do a prayer for Yemoja, or we're going to do a prayer for the ancestors. And we amplify, all of our energy is focused in that moment, 7 o'clock on Sunday, to that space. And so I think the same thing is possible with collective grief in this moment where we're in self-isolating and social distancing, to make the offer and say, okay, this person has made their transition. Our beloved has made their transition. We are going to hold collective space virtually for each other. And you put the word out and you say, on this day, we're going to do this. On this day, we're going to do this, right? You have somebody who's willing to reach out to that person's family to ask them, what can we do? They might need financial support, right? So to figure out, do you need money? Are you good? What needs to happen? And so there are a lot of ways that people can kick in, even if we're having to do it virtually in this moment, right? And then on the other side of this, when we're no longer social isolating, when we're no longer distancing ourselves, when we're no longer in our homes, you gather. You deliberately gather on purpose. And you sing and you pray and you do libation and you eat together and you tell stories on purpose together. Because that person's memory is always going to live in your heart, no matter how long this period lasts. And when it comes to an end, you can come together and you can connect in that heart space with each other. And you can celebrate that person's life and their impact on the community. That is available to you until the day you die. That is available to you until the day you die. You can continue to celebrate that person's life as an individual and as a community.
Yes, thank you, Omi, because that's where I was going, right? That this whole, the way that American culture treats funerals, right? And this whole working in organizations that you get 3 days of bereavement leave, as if like, okay, so now, all right, you had bereavement leave, now come on back. Everything is the same. Grief is spiraling, right? And it's a roller coaster ride, and it's always there, right? But the way that we are socialized in this overculture, as my people call it, we stick grief in a box, right? And we don't let it breathe, and then it just grows into this green slimy monster. I'm visual, so that's what I see. And then it explodes at the most unopportune time. But when you're allowed to grieve and have people to hold space for you whenever it pops up, it doesn't morph into that little nasty green monster that you hide or try to hide or ignore, right? Just be, right? That there are times when I miss my mother, right? There are times when I miss my grandmother, and she died when I was 8, and I'm not good with math, so I don't know how many years ago that is, but it's over 40, right? And I allow myself, and I have people in my life who will hold that space for me, who never say, well, you know, you were 8 when your grandmama died. Aren't you over that yet? No, no, I'm allowed to grieve. So just don't, again, we're at a place, we're at the precipice where we can like throw off the shackles of this mess this fuckery that we've been living in. Let it go, because we can show up in a different way if we have the bold audacity to be like, no, not again, right? Show up as our full selves collectively, right? Just because this is how it was, that's gone, right? So show up differently and be with one another. And I can't stress enough to begin your own process, because when you're whole, when you begin, you come to your healing and you are becoming whole, that you will see other people as whole, right? The fear of the other is not there, right? So that's also the lie of that we're separated. We're not, right? So this is about death and dying, as I said, right? There's a bigger thing that's dying, and it's this lie that we've all been socialized in, right? And so it's how we be. How do we decide to be, right? And it's not like, okay, we're doing this on Tuesday and then Friday, I know who I am. This is an unraveling as well. So be gentle with yourself. Give yourself permission. You're going to fall. I promise. I fall flat on my face and then I get back up, right? Sometimes people have to help me up, right? But we're not in this alone. We're all going through this process, which is, it has the potential that if all of us are like, we're not going back here, then the system cannot continue.
Well, I hope that you, if you weren't clear at the beginning, are abundantly clear now why it was so valuable to have an opportunity to have Omisade and Vivette join us for this conversation. I want to make sure that you all know that Vivette and Omi have spent their lives gathering people in spaces in the name of liberation, in the name of healing, and as you well know, these spaces are now fewer and far between. And so I hope that you will offer some support, some encouragement to both Vivette and Omisade by supporting their work. Vivette's Venmo is Vivette-Jeffries-Logan. And Omisade's Cash App is $Omitutu or Venmo at Omisade5. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I hope that you all stay well, stay connected, and stay in the sacred. Thank you so much, Omi and Vivette, and have a good night, y'all.